So, as was mentioned in the last chapter of the video study guide, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected on a platform of basically promising a new deal with the American people, using the full might of the government to try to stimulate the economy and get people back to work and get people back on their feet again. And the real true aims of the New Deal were kind of threefold. The first was to provide relief to people who were starving, who had no money, who had no homes, and giving aid directly to people. The next step was recovery, which was an attempt to kind of create jobs that were funded by the government in a way of helping the economy get back on its feet again. And then the reform, which is passing laws and creating programs that were aimed at preventing this kind of wholesale collapse of the economy from ever happening again. So the six programs that we're really going to focus on more than any other are ones we went over in class. There was a lot more programs that were part of the New Deal. Some of them were very successful. Many of them were failures, and that was kind of, FDR knew that going into this, that a lot of the things that he was going to try were not going to work, but he felt as though that the government had to try to do something to get the country back on its feet again. So I'm going to try to quickly go through these six programs, and remember, you will have your advertisements that were created for these programs available to you on the day of the quiz. Okay. So the first we took a look at was the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which is a kind of a strange sounding law because it was aimed at helping to raise the value of crops and therefore raising the prices of crops. But it was paying farmers something called subsidies to produce less of seven key crops, which was corn, wheat, cotton, rice, peanuts, tobacco, and milk. If you produce less of something, that means the supply is lower, and that means that it's going to increase the value of the crops, and that was aimed at helping farmers get back on their feet. So it's kind of counterintuitive that the government is going to give farmers money to farm less, but again, it was aimed at bringing value back to the crops that they were growing. To do this, though, you also had to have programs that were aimed at providing good paying jobs to people, because this also meant that food was going to become more expensive. So there were a lot of jobs programs. The Civilian Conservation Corps is one of these. And again, this was providing work. This was a jobs program paying people, the government paying people or funding these jobs. In this case, jobless men in small construction projects, but also preserving nature. So working in national parks and state parks and local parks, working to prevent erosion and plant trees and clear forests and stuff like that. So the Civilian Conservation Corps, again, aimed at kind of protecting nature, but mostly also aimed at providing jobs and putting money in the pockets of people so they can go out and spend that money and get the economy moving again. The TVA does something similar, the Tennessee Valley Authority. This, again, creates jobs, but these are much bigger construction jobs. These are all, for the TVA, were all located in Tennessee, right on the Tennessee River, building dams. This was going to control flooding of the river, but it was also, the biggest thing was that it was bringing electricity through something called hydroelectric plants to these parts of the South which did not have electricity before. So you see in that picture there, the river would flow through those dams. It would turn what are called turbines. These huge pieces of metal would turn, and that generated electricity, and that brought electricity to parts of the rural South that had not had electricity before. That was the main aim of the program. But again, the big aim was to put people to work building these dams and building these hydroelectric plants. That was the TVA. The WPA, the Works Progress Administration, also funded construction projects aimed more at local construction projects, towns and small cities and things like that. Focused on artists and writers and musicians. Photographers would have been part of this as well. People painting murals, sculptures that were going to be displayed within the towns. And again, other smaller construction projects that were mostly in small towns and really small cities that were, again, helped those cities a lot, but most importantly, provided jobs and helped people get back to work and get money in their pockets. The Social Security Administration, or the Social Security Act, was a really important one that had more to do with providing relief. And this is one of those ones that still exists today. So the Social Security Act stated that money would be taken directly from the paychecks of people who were working at that time. And that money would be used to fund a program that was going to give money, that's what a pension is, to people who were unable to work, either because they had exceeded the age to be able to work, senior citizens, elderly people, that sort of thing. They honestly could not find work. They could prove that they were trying to get jobs, but there was just no jobs to be had. That would be the unemployed, people who were part of the labor force but couldn't find jobs. Which again, at the beginning of the Depression, 1933, we're talking 25% of the labor force could not find jobs, and then people who were disabled and physically could not work. And what the Social Security Act aimed to do was to help those three groups, especially, just have some money coming in. They weren't going to be wealthy, but it was going to cover at least some of their basic needs and, again, help people during the Great Depression, and now continues to help people. And the last one was one that was aimed at reforming the system, and this was the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. We talked about how banks failed, and it was because people put their money into the banks, into savings account. The banks would then lend that money out to people who are buying things on credit or buying homes or buying cars, or if they're buying stocks on margin. And the banks lent out as much as they possibly could because when those loans came back, they were coming back with interest. So a $100 bank loan might come back as $105 or $110, depending on the type of the loan. And that's how banks were making money. But the problem was, once the Depression got worse and those loans could not be paid back, the banks collapsed and the money wasn't coming back in. And when people went to go take their money out of the banks, the money was gone. What the FDIC did was it basically stated in 1933, which is when this starts, that up to $5,000 that you put in the bank was guaranteed to be there even if the bank failed. So this is basically kind of a government fund, money being held in reserve. So this way, if banks did fail, the people who put their money in their banks responsibly would get their money back, up to $5,000. If you look there, and we talked about this in class, obviously money has changed now. The value of money has changed now, and those deposits are now insured up to $250,000. So these are the six main New Deal programs that we talked about in class that we really focused on mostly. You'll be asked some scenarios on the test. You'll read a little story, and you're going to try to figure out, based on what the character is going through in that story, which New Deal program would be most helpful for them. And you'll have the advertisements that were created by your classmates or perhaps by you to help you answer those questions and give some good details in those short answer questions.